Hey everyone, welcome to our second video about photosynthesis. This time we are focusing on the chloroplast, which is the organelle where photosynthesis happens. And it's kind of a complex organelle, and this is a diagram of it. And let's talk through what the different parts of this organelle are. But first, I've got a little idea for you. So you can see this is kind of a complicated organelle, and it's kind of an interesting thing that it's so complicated. So we have this idea in science, and it's kind of a relatively new idea in science. In fact, we didn't even study this idea when I was in high school, and I graduated in 2009. So it is a fairly new topic. You're learning it in 2020. So it's been really developed to be taught within the past 10 to 15 years. So anyway, there's this theory. It's called the endosymbiotic theory. And we'll talk about it more when we talk about cellular respiration. But what I want you to know about it is that there is a theory that some of these more complex organelles, the chloroplast and the mitochondria, actually might have used to exist as their own cells, like bacteria type cells, and that they have developed into these organelles and been absorbed into more complex eukaryotic cells like animal cells or plant cells, and that they have kind of developed along with the more complex plant or animal cells. So that's called endosymbiotic theory. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit more with cell respiration, but I just thought you should know and think about that as you look at the chloroplast and see that it is a pretty complex organelle. And so let's talk about the different parts. You will need to know how to label the different parts of the chloroplast. And so let's kind of go in order, A, B, C, D, E, alphabetical order here with the labels. So A, you can see it over here. And this kind of looks like a big stack of pancakes almost. It would be colored green in the actual chloroplast because it does contain pigments, chlorophyll pigments. And that stack that looks like a stack of pancakes is called the granum, and each stack is called a thylakoid. We'll get to that, but the whole stack is called a granum. Next up, part B, you have circular DNA. So chloroplasts actually have their own DNA that is separate from the plant's DNA, which is part of why we think that of that endosymbiotic theory, where chloroplasts might have developed on their own and then been taken in by plants. Label C, it's this little bridge that kind of connects the granum, so connects the different stacks of thylakoid or granum. And that little thing is called a lamella. And basically it allows for transportation of materials between each of the granum. D is kind of pointing to an empty space, but it's a jelly-like substance. It's kind of like cytoplasm. In our cells, we have cytoplasm that holds all the materials in place, but it's not called cytoplasm when it's inside a chloroplast. Instead, it is called stroma. So stroma is the gel-like material in a chloroplast. Label E, I've kind of already talked about this a little bit, but it is each individual stack within the granum, and each individual stack is called a thylakoid. So thylakoid is one stack, multiple thylakoids are many stacks. And when you put the whole stack together, you get a granum. All right, next label, F. It's pointing to this kind of inner line here, and that is called the inner membrane. Chloroplasts actually have two membranes around them. Our cells only have one cell membrane, but chloroplasts have two, which means they're probably pretty choosy about what comes in and out of the chloroplast. So there's the inner membrane, and then there's the outer membrane that you can see there. And the last thing, which also leads us to believe this endosymbiotic theory that chloroplasts could have existed on their own, is these little dots. And you'll remember that even in our cells, the little dots were ribosomes. So chloroplasts have their own circular DNA and ribosomes, which means they can make their own proteins, and that's pretty cool. But anyway, let's talk more about why that all matters. So where does photosynthesis happen? Of course, that happens in the chloroplast, which is an organelle in plants and some other organisms, but mostly plants, and it captures the energy from the sunlight. In the thylakoids, there's what we call pigments, and they capture that sunlight energy and convert it into chemical energy, which is glucose. So what type of organisms have chloroplasts? It's plants. Which organelle does photosynthesis happen? It's chloroplast. How does this process get started? Well, in the thylakoid are chlorophyll pigments, and they absorb the light energy and help get the light reactions started. Where are the light reactions? Again, they're in the thylakoid. And remember, a stack of thylakoids is called a granum. And then that is basically where the light happens. So basically sunlight comes in and water comes in and oxygen is released as a byproduct, but it makes this energy stuff called ATP that will get used during the Calvin cycle. And the Calvin cycle is a process where carbon dioxide gets converted into glucose, and the Calvin cycle takes place way out here in the stroma, which is that jelly-like area of the chloroplast. So if you're going to look at the chloroplast as a whole, just know it's in plants. It does photosynthesis because it has chlorophyll pigments that absorb light energy. The light reactions take place in the thylakoid, and the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reactions, take place in the stroma. So that's it for the chloroplast. Thank you so much for listening.